Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Piotr Gajewski, and this is Jason Vieaux. And we'll talk a little bit about the program that we're about to perform for you. So let's get comfortable and start with you, Jason. You're playing a couple of guitar concertos.
Yes, the first guitar concerto that you'll hear on the program is originally written for lute. The guitar at this time in history was mainly an instrument used for accompanying voice. It was a 5 doubled courses and mainly used not necessarily in a solo context. So when we play these Vivaldi concertos on a modern guitar, they are originally for lute or mandolin. And this is a lute concerto in D major and has the very famous, well, I mean, all the movements are pretty well known, but the one that's really well known is the second movement, the beautiful slow movement featured in movies and many television ads over the years. And then following that, all the pieces on the program are actually from the Baroque era of classical music or concert music, except for the second guitar concerto on the program, the Fantasía para un gentilhombre, Fantasy for a Gentleman by Joaquin Rodrigo. And this piece was composed in 1954 for Andrés Segovia, the great Spanish guitarist, and who really, without his work and his great artistry and ambition, I probably wouldn't be sitting on this stage today. And so this, Rodrigo's first guitar concerto, the probably more famous one, the Concerto de Aranjuez, was actually not written for Segovia. It was written for Regino Sáenz de la Maza. So Segovia requested this second concerto for him, and in fact, the gentleman referred to in the title, Fantasy for a Gentleman, is indeed Andrés Segovia. So, but what ties it to the rest of the program is that all the tunes that you hear, all the melodies in all the movements, are all borrowed by Rodrigo from Gaspar Sanz, the Spanish Baroque guitarist, who wrote a manual in 3 volumes on how to play the Spanish guitar of the time. And these were published in 1674, 1675, and the 3rd volume came some 20 years later, 1697. He must have been busy with other projects in between. And so all of these tunes in the 4 movements of the Rodrigo Concerto are original melodies and the tunes by Sanz, but then expanded upon with repetition and just made into larger works, so that the whole concerto itself is a little over 20 minutes.
And also spiced up in some ways, both harmonically with some well-chosen dissonances, and with the orchestration. This work has 5 wind instruments, and kind of unique. There's a piccolo, there's a flute, there's an oboe, there's a bassoon, and there's a trumpet. So notice, for example, absence of a clarinet or absence of a horn. It's kind of a unique group of instruments, and in the piece they sometimes play together. It's an interesting challenge to find a balance. Trumpet, being a brass instrument, is naturally louder, so need to be careful with that. Piccolo, being a very, very high and trill instrument, doesn't necessarily blend in with the others. But I think all of this is by design, to give it all kinds of spice, to spice up these Baroque tunes. As Jason mentioned, the program, as you all know, the program consists of Baroque works. Late Baroque period, meaning very early 18th century, have made a great contribution to the world of music, and essentially having the orchestra emerge in a way that that we know it today, especially the string section. That's the time when orchestras begin to be formed from first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, basses, and it continues to this day. I mean, the way we have symphony orchestras, that's the basis for an orchestra with winds added as needed. One of the things that we're doing slightly differently for you this afternoon in terms of the orchestra is you're used to seeing the orchestra seated with first violins here right behind me, and then second violins over there, and violas over there, and cellos on the outside over there. When orchestras were first contemplated in the 18th century, one of the ideas was that the first and second violins actually offset each other in some ways. From what we know, the seating arrangement back then was with the violins opposite each other. So that's what we're doing for this concert. It's kind of fun. So you'll see first violins in their usual place, but then second violins will be on that side of the stage, and there's some interplay between the two that you'll notice on almost all the works, and then violas over here, and cellos, and of course basses back there. It's a bit of a challenge for any orchestra to actually reseat itself. Orchestra members get used to hearing certain parts in certain ways, and there's a comfort level to that. So it's a little bit challenging to actually sit differently, but it's lots of fun. You'll see them listening to each other very, very intently. The four Baroque works on the program are by three different composers, Handel, Vivaldi, and Bach, who represent really the pinnacle of Baroque achievement. They're scattered through Europe, Bach in Germany, Handel mostly in England, and Vivaldi in Italy, and they all incorporated different styles of Baroque into their music. So it's kind of interesting to hear the contrasts this afternoon. They're also known for very different types of compositions. Vivaldi is perhaps best known for concertos. He wrote literally several hundred concertos, so almost 500, I think, and for various instruments or groups of instruments. And he would just turn them out with great frequency. Handel, well known for his operas and oratorios. Today we're hearing two works of Handel, so he's the winner of the Baroque contest this afternoon. The program begins with an overture to Samson, one of his oratorios. This oratorio was composed immediately following the Messiah, of course, now his most famous oratorio. And each of them has the distinction of having been composed incredibly rapidly. Messiah literally in just a few weeks, and Samson also in less than a month. It's always mind-boggling for me that is even physically possible. That's physically possible for a composer to sit down and write work, that's several hours in length, with different instruments and several vocalists and chorus, and write that in a 20-day or 25-day period. Never mind inventing it, but just the process of writing it down in itself. I'm not quite sure how that gets accomplished. I was mentioning last night that that it would be interesting to actually ask an individual to sit down and try and write one of these works out. Simply copy it from beginning to end, and see if that's even possible in that period of time for a modern copyist to do by hand.
Be
But
a good reality game show or something like that. They'd be sitting in a cage or something like that, and the bottom would fall out if they couldn't finish it.
if they couldn't finish it. Yeah, yeah. Well, you could. One could contemplate all kinds of different rules. You could have a race between Samson and Messiah, and
That's right. That's it.
but
Two people, right?
two people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and yet the music is so wonderful and engaging. In terms of the Samson Overture, my understanding is that it's the very first performance in Buffalo, so you'll be experiencing a Handel premiere here. It's scored for a pair of horns and pair of oboes. Horns are playing a very prominent role in all of today's program. The other work by Handel, water music, of course, well known and loved, and with some great history to it of actually being played out on barges on the water in London. It was commissioned by then monarch who enjoyed traveling up and down the river. I understand it was a pastime of many, but when he did it in style with all kinds of food being served and his own music being played. The tunes are very familiar. They feature again horns, a pair of horns and a pair of trumpets. One of the interesting things about the tunes and about featuring those instruments is back in those days the instruments were very different. They didn't include any valves, so the notes available on those instruments were extraordinarily limited. I mean, right, a modern horn today or a modern trumpet can play all the notes of a chromatic scale. The instruments back then were limited to just the natural overtone series, which in practical terms literally means about 7 or 8 or maybe 9 notes that are available on the instrument. So the challenge for Handel was to compose tunes with just those few notes. And that is why if you sometimes think about, well, what is it that makes a hunting horn call sound like a hunting horn call? It's because it's limited to just those few notes. So there's a certain sameness about those tunes, and yet even with those few notes, the possibilities are well, nearly infinite. I mean, very, very numerous in terms of how many tunes can be composed. So they're the same, and yet they're very different and interesting.
Would these been the same instruments in the Bach orchestral suite as well? The same kind of horns, the limited range?
Exactly. Now, in the Bach, there are 3 trumpets. There are no horns, but again, the notes are just the few. And in the Bach, the trumpets are used in all but one of the movements, and they're used sparingly. But again, the tunes are constructed in such a way that the trumpets really add a very special flavor to the music. They sort of present the impact of in the various movements. Speaking of the Bach, it's a orchestral suite, and Bach composed just 4 of those. I mean, Bach's big thing was he worked for church for most of his life, so he composed a couple hundred of cantatas, church cantatas, but he also composed pure instrumental music. But for orchestra, really, we're just limited to the 6 Brandenburg concertos and the 4 orchestral suites, and those 10 works were composed roughly at the same time, around 1720. Which, incidentally, the water music was also composed right around 1720. So you're talking about hearing music. All of the second half of today's concert, the music was composed within just a few years of each other. The orchestral suites, or suites in general, typically consists of major beginning overture, typically in what's known French style, so there's lots of dotted rhythms. It starts off with a yum, ta-tum, ta-tam, that kind of rhythm, a slow portion, and then followed by a fast portion, which is kind of fugal in nature. Very, very complicated contrapuntal writing, and that's actually where some of this separation between the violins comes into play, as you'll see. These guys playing a tune, and then the other side repeating it or whatnot. And then a lot of the overtures also end with return of a slow portion. Following the overture, typically are a number of dances, and the kinds of dances available to Bach include gavottes, bourrées, gigs. He also has in other overtures, certainly minuets. He has a polonaise in his second overture. Trying to think of others. Can you think of other dances that are included in overtures, in French overtures, or do they?
Gavotte, Louré.
Louré, yeah, Louré. Sarabande is a
slow movement.
Often, yeah. So there are all kinds of dances available, and in this suite, Bach writes two gavottes, which are played together, followed by a bourrée, followed by a gigue. A sort of a central moment for the suite is the air, which is of course not a dance. It's a song of sorts, and easily the most famous part of this particular suite, and likely one of the most famous pieces that Bach ever composed, that continues to be played and arranged for all kinds of different instruments. In fact, the sort of the title that it has goes by, the air on G string, has absolutely nothing to do with the original composition, but has to do with an arrangement for a solo violin, which was put in a different key and composed in such a way that all of it can be played on the lowest string of the violin, kind of the meatiest sound of the violin. So that's where the nickname came from. But it has little to do with what we'll play for you this afternoon. But it's a wonderful inclusion in the suite, in that it kind of breaks the mold of just dances. In terms of the dances, going back to the Handel water music, that's also a suite, and also has numerous dances. And this one does have a minuet. Also has a bourrée. So you'll hear two bourrées today. One by Bach, one by Handel. What makes these dances interesting is that they're very contrasting, because they're very, very different in meter and in articulation and how they project. Minuet, of course, is a dance in three that goes yum ta 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 tim pum pum pum, that kind of feeling. A gavotte always starts in the middle of a measure. It's a sort of a slow, medium speed two. Yum tum 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 yum tum tum ta da yum ta da dum pa da yum pum pum, that sort of thing. Bourrée is a little bit faster and starts with a single note pickup, so pum 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 pa da dum, that kind of feeling, and you can compare the Handel and the Bach. Any other thoughts on anything we're playing?
Well, I actually just a question kind of popped into my head about is that why they're, because of I'm still the thing of the limited range of is that why of the brass instruments, is that why they're in the same key? Just because that's what those are they both in D major, or am I,
they're both in D major, but actually it's a very interesting question, because of course pieces were written in different keys in Baroque times, and they did include brass instruments. But what would happen is there's a part that you can remove.
Oh, I
see. Called a crook, and insert a different part. And there is what would happen is horn players and trumpet players would travel essentially with a case of different crooks that they would use for different keys. So they would be essentially extensions of different size that they would insert into the instrument, but you couldn't switch between those terribly conveniently. So once you had one in, you're confined to that. So yes, both of the works that we're playing today happen to be in D major, so they would have used the same crooks. But the other Handel Water music suites are, one is in F major, the other is in G major. So they would have simply switched out the crooks to play in those keys. But once you make that commitment, you're then limited to the seven or eight or nine notes or so.
It'd be difficult to play a Mahler symphony then.
It would be impossible to play a Mahler symphony. They could do one of the other things one of the other ways they could kind of sort of get some other notes is actually they could bend the sound a little bit with their lips. But those notes don't sound very good, so composers avoided actually using that technique. But when you get into like a Mozart horn concerto, which also would have been on the natural horns, there's some extra notes, but on a natural horn they don't sound very good, because it's basically sort of cheating Mother Nature. It's not the natural note on the horn. It's sort of using one of the natural notes and playing it a little bit flat by doing some mechanics with your mouth. But anyway, in the works you hear this afternoon, there's really none of that. Anyway, any questions pop into anyone's mind? We're here at your. Yes, there is I mean, in modern times, the word can be applied to other usages. For example, abridged versions of works, be they ballets or operas or other such collections of excerpts from a work, are sometimes referred to as suites. But the original use of the word was indeed a collection of dances. Yes. Exactly. So that's and in that case, it's a collection of works with a certain thematic, certain evocation to it, right? So in modern days, the word has gained the usage of a collection of pieces that that are somehow joined together. But back when it was the dances. I do want to tell you that you have a very, very special occasion this afternoon in having Jason, who is originally from Buffalo, make his Buffalo Philharmonic debut. So that's terribly exciting.
Yeah, it's great. I grew up in Clarence, and so we would be bused. I also went to Cal Sanctius School for a little bit, for about 4 years, and remember coming to Kleinhans Hall as a little kid, sitting in the front rows here with the orchestra playing, and then of course as I got into my teens, I went to several concerts here that were very important concerts for me to see of guitarists, solo recitals by Christopher Parkening and Julian Bream. I think I sat right in the front row, right where you're sitting, for Julian Bream, and that was an amazing experience, because he was probably my biggest music hero at the time. And so yeah, it's great to be able to come back here and play for everyone here again. This has been a dream of mine for a long time.
And there's more, which is that the Rodrigo work that you will hear does exist actually in an arrangement for flute and orchestra, which was commissioned by James Galloway, and that work for flute and orchestra has been performed here in Buffalo some years ago by James Galloway. But the original version for guitar and orchestra has never been performed here. So you're hearing Jason back in Buffalo in a Buffalo premiere of the Rodrigo work. So good times. Any other question? Yes.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
The comment was, thank you for not playing the Aranjuez. But,
well,
thank you very much.
Great.
Yes.
Well,
she was thanking us, so we're too modest to repeat it.
She was. The comment was that we would thank you for not playing the Concerto de Aranjuez because that by Rodrigo, because of course that's the one that is almost always heard. I probably play it 15 times a year, and while I love playing it just because of its challenges, but it's that not only Fantasía para un Gentil Hombre, but there's many other fantastic concertos by Castro Tedesco and Manuel Ponce, Villalobos, that are cruelly underperformed. So I agree with that sentiment. Thank you.
And that's all we have for you for right now. We'll be back in about half an hour to play for you.
Thanks.
Enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir. Sound.